Very good afternoon and welcome to RwandaTV this afternoon. Welcome to 360 Degrees. My name is Ethan Tashobia. This afternoon, we're talking about science and technology and innovation. Now, Rwanda has aiming to become a middle-income country by 2035 and a highly-income country by 2050. But one of the biggest enablers of this national development agenda is science, technology, and innovation. Now, this afternoon, the National Council of Science and Technology launched Science, Technology, and Innovation Status and the National Roadmap report finding to support the informed decision-making by policymakers, leaders, scientists, and the society from the public and the private sector. And those are some of the things we'll be talking about this very afternoon. How do we achieve the National Development Agenda, and how can the science and technology and research and innovation be a part of that very development that we think is actually sustainable for this very country that we are in, that we love to call home. Now, to help me break down some of the questions you and I may have, I'm joined by a panel of informed scientists and sector players. And if you allow me, I have a list of them right here. And let me start by on someone on my immediate left, who's Professor Beth Kaplan, the director of Center of Excellence for Biodiversity at the University of Rwanda. Thanks for finding time to speak to us on RwandaTV. And then I'm joined, of course, next to her is Dr. Eugene Mutimura, who is the Executive Secretary of the National Council for Science and Technology. Thank you so much for being on this very program. We have the private sector players, and this one is represented by Mrs. Kevin Bajeneza, who is the founder and CEO of Natcom Services Limited. Thank you so much for joining us on RwandaTV, especially here on 360 Degrees. And there is someone who is actually, training the next scientists and some scientists who are already in the industry. And he has a few things or two to inform us about the human resource, especially in the science and technology. And that is Professor Alexander Yambabaje, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Rwanda. Thank you so much for being part of this program.
My pleasure.
The next 1 hour, we'll be talking about science, technology, and innovation, but we'll also be getting to know what this report that was launched this very afternoon by the National Council of Science and Technology comes to solve, or what it informs us as we march towards the National Transformation Agenda, which is 2035. 2063 is the African Union one, but I will also have the Vision 2050. Now, if you allow me, let me start with you, Dr. Eugene. If you look at the report that was presented today of science, technology, and innovation status, what does it inform us as a country in regards to where we want to be and where we are now?
Thank you, Ethan. It's our pleasure in the first place to be here with you to discuss some of these important areas related to the details of the launch of the status of science, technology, and innovation report, as well as research and experimental development report that we launched today. In the first place, they are important reports that are very, very informative. The report on the status of science, technology, and innovation informs us as a country to which extent have we invested in science and technology, what have been expenditures, and therefore how have we utilized science, technology, and innovation to develop as a country in terms of infrastructure, resources, investment, in terms of human resources investment, in terms of collaboration as well, but also in terms of knowledge transfer and knowledge generation. The report on research and experimental development, reference 2018-2019, again is a report that comes up to inform us as a country to which extent have we invested in research and development, because these are critical reports and these are critical elements that have indicators that tell us where we are as a country. In terms of, for instance, if you have to develop as a country, you have to be innovative. Innovations related to outputs related to research. And so we know, for instance, to which extent our country has invested in R&D. Over the 3-year period from 2015-2016, over a change actually between 44 billion to 70 billion were invested into R&D, translating into 0.66 to 0.69% of national gross domestic expenditure. And the target for African countries by African Union standard is 1% investment in R&D. We are not where we are as a country, but we are far in terms of where we have been and where we are going. So these reports are critical, important, because they tell us where we are in alignment with African agenda, as well as where we are in terms of Vision 2020 and Vision 2050.
I think the person who knows where we are right now is the person who is actually out in the field, who runs the technology-based businesses on a daily basis. Maybe education will tell us something different, but I want to engage in Madam Kevin Bajeneza. If you look at your business and the scientists, I think it requires scientists mostly. What kind of gaps do you see on a daily basis, and how can Professor Ryambabaje come in and Professor Kaplan to support your business grow in terms of research technology, but also science?
Thank you. I see the gaps and some challenges in science, technology, and innovation. If I talk about the business sector, there's a gap of skills gap and the linkage to the job market and the industries in general, whereby the schools of higher learning, the institutions of higher learning, the production that is coming from there, they have to be ready for the market, the job market. So there is a need for that linkage in terms of promoting science and technology and innovation. Yeah, we are in technology business, but everything is about science. So there is a need for research and development, and there is a need for the readiness of the graduates who are graduating from higher institutions to link up with the market outside and to have the thinking of not only looking for the jobs, but actually using their skills to become innovative.
Interesting. Professor Ryambabaje, and I think I will also ask you to chip in for this particular one. Quite a number of gaps that she mentions there. But it was also seen that the government has done a lot in investing in this particular sector. If one thing that we've learned from COVID-19 is the importance of science and technology, but also research. Has it been a wake-up call to change how you do things as educationists? Let me start with you, Dr. Ryambabaje.
Yeah, thank you very much
Brother
for
Professor,
this opportunity.
my apologies, yes.
Yeah, to share with the audience what is being done at University of Rwanda when it comes to research activities. You know that University of Rwanda has got the mission to develop human resources for all sectors. Of recent, the government of Rwanda opted for emphasizing the importance of science and technology. And to achieve that, to build capacity of researchers, the government invested heavily in putting in place specialized centers of excellence. That is back in 2016, 2017, when we started with centers of excellence in Internet of Things, Center of Excellence in Data Science, Center of Excellence in Renewable Energy, to mention only those ones. In those centers of excellence, we train people at higher level, at master's degree and PhD degree levels, where the focus is really on research. In addition to that, the government of Rwanda also managed to establish an incubation center in one of the centers of excellence, which is the Regional Center Innovation Hub in renewable energy. so that in addition to research and publications, good ideas from researchers could be tested while at university. But as mentioned by my colleague from the private sector, it is clear that we have to strengthen the linkages between the public, the private sector, and the university and the higher learning institutions. And for that, we are happy that the National Commission for Science and Technology is really providing incentives for collaboration between industry and university through specific research grants, where for some research grants, captains from industries are the principal investigators and vice versa, with obligation to bring them together and work together on specific research activities, but also with the aim of uptake of research findings by the industry. Mm-hmm. So I think that is what is being done as of today, although we are still far from really reaching the critical number of researchers we would like to have in different specific areas.
How do we get close to that? We're still far from getting the number of researchers we want. How do we close that gap?
Yeah, that's a good question, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about this with colleagues here. I've been doing a lot of teaching recently during the pandemic, so it has been very different as it has been around the globe. We have to use technology, and I think a way to close this gap, something I think that's very important is to make sure that science remains at the heart, this element of curiosity and passion and interest. And of course, we have memorization that needs to happen through parts of that. But I think bringing back that element of deep inquiry and excitement over what we see. And I'm always admonishing my students, get off your phone, you won't die if you're not on your phone all the time, because there's so much happening out here in the world right now. And I think encouraging our students to really know that not everything is known. There's a lot we don't know. I mean, this pandemic really showed us that in a big way. And we really had to amp up in terms of so many different systems that we needed to deal with this pandemic. And on top of that, we're dealing with climate change. We're dealing with a biodiversity crisis. So I think there's a kind of a positive element to that needs to drive the engagement between the university and the government trying to achieve its objectives. And I just want to emphasize what our Vice Chancellor said, that there have been tremendous changes in the time that I've been at the university in support for research and in pushing changes in how we do teaching that really get students to engage with critical thinking skills and moving away from simply memorizing. And I think that's one way that we can get to meeting some of the challenges that Devine mentioned and also the reports in NCST.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Dr. Eugene, like you're saying, to have a knowledge-based economy, we need science-driven, data-driven decisions as well. If you look at the report that was put out there, as the stakeholders in science, what would you put out to the authorities and decision makers at a higher level?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. And we are all leaders.
Yeah.
We are all scientists. Therefore, we are all responsible. So what has really been shown by these reports are two things. One, achievements, which we can really rejoice about. We have seen, for instance, good indicators in terms of good governance, STI policy launched, for instance, good coordination mechanism. The report also gave us a clue of mapping of STI and R&D research support services well done at a national level, and indicators are very promising. But we see gaps, for instance, in terms of innovation outputs. A lot of investment, centers of excellence, as Professor Alexander indicated, a lot of infrastructure, funding mechanism through National Council for Science and Technology to fund R&D. Of course, we see also that gross domestic expenditure on R&D has increased over time, as indicated, but we see some gaps here and there. For instance, we see less experimental research being done, meaning less innovations are going to take place. And as a country leader, as scientists, today we had an opportunity also to launch 2 important elements related to addressing that. A grant that Professor Alexander indicated, the Rwanda Innovation Challenge, to incentivize researchers, buy their time, have them sit with the industry and private sector for at least 40 to 50% time, effort, paid for, so that they do more research to innovate. Secondly, we have been working with private sector. Several of the players are on board. We signed an MOU. We want them to be more focused, to utilize science and technology infrastructure and absorption, but also support R&D or research and collaborate better with our scientists. And we have no doubt we shall reach there.
Interesting. Bajanez, one of the things that I will actually be asking you is, especially businesses. If you look at the investment in science, technology, and innovation, how best can you, as the private sector, utilize the environment, rather the investment that has been put out by the authorities? And are there any challenges that do you think are limiting the private sector to utilizing the investment that has been put out in this sector?
Thank you. There is a lot of investment that has been done so far. The government has done a lot in terms of infrastructure, in terms of promoting technology, and actually the institutions of higher learning also are doing a lot. But what I would say that in terms of investing into it, we have to involve everyone. It's actually for everyone's task, because the education or science is everything. So it has to start from the beginning, from high schools, from secondary schools, whereby we build the mindsets of the young ones, so that when they get to the higher institutions, they are already set to promote and to implement science and technology. And what has been done so far has to be known to them. Yeah, for example, if we are promoting STEM careers to be a balanced aspect and not to be a male-dominated career, for example, we need to see the balance of girls and boys in STEM careers. There are some initiatives going on, but we need more efforts, we need more collaborations in different sectors, yeah? So that everything we see is about science, but everyone else also has to look at it in that way, yeah? So that even the investors will find the market that is prepared, yeah, to invest in. Yeah, because if even the incentives for students, like the professor has said that students are doing researches and development, but they need to put incentives and fundings in that, so that they will be motivated to do those researches that are really fruitful.
I think, Professor Yambaje, this question will still go back to the quantity, but also the quality of scientists that we produce from our universities and from our tertiary institutions. How best can we increase the volume of scientists, but also increase the quality of scientists? Oftentimes, we've seen that when students graduate, they wait for the industry practice to actually be who they want to be. So I think there's a lot of question marks on our education system, isn't it?
Well, I think on one side you're right that the numbers we train in Rwanda, I mean at master's degree and PhD degree levels, are still very small. Like this year we graduated less than 10 PhD people. So it is understandable because we only recently started postgraduate studies at the University of Rwanda. The majority of people working as senior researchers or senior professors have been trained abroad for a number of years. But we are doing our best to increase opportunities for people to be trained at postgraduate level in our country. And that is informed by the new centers of excellence that are being established, including Center of Excellence in Biodiversity. We have a Center of Excellence in Biomedical Engineering. We have a Center of Excellence on Vaccines. And we also establishing other master's degree and PhD degree programs in different areas. So very soon we will be able to train people at postgraduate level in different areas and in a very consistent manner. About quality, I think we have to look at it in two ways, because I'm always happy to see that students who go from Rwanda to study abroad, they perform very well. So in terms of knowledge, we don't have any complex on that side. But when it comes to practical skills and life skills, that is where we still have some issues to deal with. One challenge is about communication skills. It is true that we have had several reforms when it comes to the language we use, either for teaching, for learning, or even for doing business in our society. And you know that there is a very close relationship between the communication and sciences, because if you don't communicate well, people fail to get what you mean. The second challenge we are having is about practical skills. A number of colleges train students without having well-equipped laboratories or well-equipped workshops. And that is a limitation that could be handled while establishing strong linkages with industry. But again, our industry is also at a relatively infant stage. So the capacity to absorb or to train all students at undergraduate level from the University of Rwanda, that capacity is still relatively low. So for practicals, we really need to invest a little bit more in laboratories, to invest more in industries and make them understand that it is in their benefit to provide internship to students, because by the end of the day, they will be the one to benefit from the human resources trained at university. So I would like to invite private sector to look at it in a way that they may not expect that students who graduate university may come with all skills and knowledge without the full participation in that activity. So I would like to invite both way movement, private sector coming to university, university going to private sector, so that there is a kind of bond, really strong working relationship between the two.
You raise a very valid questions, the question of collaboration, the question of communication. But I want to take you back to something you mentioned, which actually caught my attention, the Center of Excellence for Vaccines. How new is it? I'm asking this for the public interest, because we know the vaccines is a big issue currently. When you say something that is related to vaccines, we want to know how new is that, and how does it fit into the situation we're in right now of, probably starting to produce vaccines in the near future.
Yeah, I will share a little bit with you on that, but Professor Kaplan is organizing a conference in 2 weeks' time with the same Center of Excellence. Donc, I think
she
will
has some
be
answers.
more in a position to share more details. But
Please do.
this is a regional Center of Excellence for East African community, and it is funded through German Development Bank, FW, and it is about vaccines, immunization, and supply chain of medical equipment and products. And these centers of excellence is training human resources, professional courses, masters, and PhD programs. And very soon, now we are in negotiations with German partners to see how we can be part of the creation of an environment in Rwanda for vaccines production. So we are working with the Ministry of Health, we are working with other regional partners, and a delegation from Germany is coming next week on 29th to Kigali to see how Rwanda and Senegal was also selected as one of the countries we could start thinking about manufacturing vaccines and other products back home in the country. And the center will be responsible for, on one side, training human resources needed in that industry, but also be part of even the the provision of technical expertise in the area.
Exciting times for scientists, especially those who are dealing in vaccines, isn't it? He said you have more details about that. We're excited to hear that.
Well, I don't work with vaccines, but he's referring to what I think is an exciting international symposium that's coming here to Kigali. It will be blended, so partly in person and partly remote. And I really have to credit my colleague, Dr. Raymond Muganga. He is working in that center for Center of Excellence for Vaccine. And he is also part of this organization called NAPRECA, which is for East Africa natural products development. So it's an example of a real multidisciplinary approach to problems. So whether it's human health or the environment, these are interlinked. And of course, natural products can deal with traditional knowledge and also biodiversity, etc. So this symposium will be bringing together researchers and practitioners from different sectors to talk about human health issues and biodiversity, environment, traditional knowledge issues, how we valorize our genetic resources in the region. Yeah.
Interesting. And now let's go back to research and development, especially in the output part. He raised some very valid questions. One on collaboration, especially industrial training, but he also talked about training our scientists comprehensively, especially in the area of communication. If you could share some of the best practices that you actually know worked well worldwide. How do we make sure? Sometimes people think that if you can go into the laboratory, do your science work, do whatever you have to do, and make sure that probably the data you have is the right one, is all enough. But we actually get to find out that how you put that information out is also very, very important.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think some of the steps that we need to help fill the gap and get to the place we want to be have to do with supporting researchers in certain ways. For example, leave time, or a system where you can buy out your time, for example, to do research. And be released from some of the teaching duties, because we know in academia we almost always are dividing our time between teaching, research, and community service. And so how we divide that time up and how we have enough time to focus on certain things, I think really needs to have some attention if we want to achieve these goals we have in terms of research. So I'm not trying to leave out, I think teaching is a very important part of what we do, and of course the community outreach is as well. But for research, some of these approaches, which could involve, buying out your time so that you can focus on either writing a grant, writing a book, writing a policy brief, or preparing a paper for publication. Also being able to attend conferences. I think it's critically important that researchers have the ability to get out and interact with other researchers from different areas. I think that getting to interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approaches where researchers from different disciplines are interacting and sharing ideas, and that comes from opportunities both internally but also outside. So even for example, at the university, having opportunities to connect with different centers, because there's so much interesting work going on. And I think where the innovations come is where we have the opportunity to talk to each other and find out what we're doing. Also internally, opportunities to meet people in the private sector at the level of talking about our research and how our research could inform, and vice versa, directly with industry partners to say what their needs are. And then also doing that internationally. I think we can learn a lot by being able to get out and interact with different researchers in different disciplines, and also students having the opportunity to do that. I think in general, it's just really having a very enabling environment, because I think really good research and research that leads to innovation comes from an absolute dedication. You basically live, eat, and breathe your work, and you do it because you love it and you're really passionate about it. And that comes through having that enabling environment where you're able to do that. Yeah.
Interesting. Dr. Eugene, I think you're in the right position to advise academicians that we have here, the academic sector, but also the private sector, to make sure the collaboration, especially in the terms of industrial training, is done in the best way possible to ensure that we have the best scientists, but also in terms of quality and the quantity.
Thank you. In the first place, it is the obligation of everybody, mainly leaders and scientists, to know that we broaden collaborations between researchers in universities, researchers at various research institutions, RBC, RAB, REMA, and others. And for that, actually, we have put up a coordination mechanism of 11 players across the country to meet quarterly, to plan together, to implement together, and also evaluate these activities. And so the role of researchers and private sector has to be guided by leaders. We are working hard with our stakeholders to incentivize researchers, but also challenge them and ensure that they do more in terms of working with the private sector really to innovate. For instance, they need to have more time paid to sit within industry to assess what they can do in terms of service development, product development. Write joint grants together, do research measurements together, disseminate findings through seminars periodically, and we will monitor that, and that's very important. I can give you an example. We are all very proud of our country in terms of Visit Rwanda, in terms of many things that we are doing. We know mobile phone penetration is very high in the country. For instance, one of the services that would be straightforward is an invention coming up with some app on a mobile phone that can guide public transport within Kigali city and above. From Remera to Kigali, you are going to use 5 minutes, 10 minutes using public means. All from the city center to the airport, period of time travel. And using an app, that indicates, of course, science and technology absorption and utilization. These are some of the services we are talking about. But more importantly, broaden collaborations in terms of, for instance, knowing that science and gender are important elements. So we have launched a grant on Women in Science grant for women to be leaders as well, because we see that in these reports, women representation is still low. And on all the grants we fund, women need to be represented at least 30%. We are also encouraging our researchers, our awardees, to ensure that they collaborate with the globally renowned experts, Rwandan diaspora in the field, to broaden opportunities. And more importantly, work together as a national council, but also universities, many stakeholders in the ecosystem of science and technology. And I'm sure we shall reach there as a country. Thank you.
Some of the issues that we see, especially in research and development, are issues of patent, copyrights, intellectual property. I think she knows that when you create something, the next day, there's an application, the next day it's going to be seen somewhere else. Are those some of the biggest issues that you actually face as entrepreneurs in things to do with science and technology, and I think some of the people will help us address how do we address the issue of innovation, creativity that will take away these issues of copyrights and intellectual property. But there are some of the issues you face in the industry regarding copyrights and patent rights and intellectual property.
Okay, thank you. On the issue of intellectual property, I think the government has worked on that, and right now we have where we register our innovations and our findings, and then it is actually registered in RDB, and you can protect your research, you can protect your innovation. The process is clear.
But these issues keep coming up.
Yeah, they keep coming up because of I would say, the awareness of it. Yeah, so many people are still copying some other people's work, some other people's ideas, and wherever it comes to be technology, then it is even higher, because technology is easy to copy sometimes, yeah, because if we still share some apps on YouTube, and YouTube is managed by somebody else, for example, it's not in our own control, because if you go deep in technology, there are other things that we need to protect at the higher level, not only by registering your intellectual property ideas, yeah, because it involves a lot of things, cybersecurity, data protection, it involves a lot of things, but that's why you see maybe some people would release this kind of music or something, and somebody else will copy it, and you will see after it has been copied, because some of the tools that are being used in technology, we are not controlling them, and it is beyond some of the controls. Because
do you think it's the issue of infrastructure, issue of training?
Somehow, not actually the issue of infrastructure, it's the issue of skills, I would say, maybe on the market, because I said science is everything, yeah? If somebody is uploading something on YouTube or sharing a link on social medias, yeah? That's where he knows, that's where the understanding is, but of course, there is another person who needs to regulate that, to put in the understanding of how to protect this kind of thing. So we need to do awareness of so many other aspects that are around that, yeah?
I also think we need to create a culture of integrity in our innovations. And actually that takes us back to what Professor Yembaoje and Professor Kaplan are doing, isn't it? Even in our trainings, the way you do your trainings, the way we in nurture innovators, I think it's upon you and all of us to nurture integrity in our innovations, isn't it?
We can look at it in two ways. First, when you look at our country, creative industry is having more products to protect. like our Uduseke, Imigongo. There are quite a lot of innovations from back home that are being taken by other countries, and there are a lot of imitations. When it comes to sciences, ICT is doing relatively well, but in other sectors we are still lagging behind. And we have to first to train our people to understand how intellectual property rights and patenting techniques work, so that we could look at patents that already expired and try to see whether we can borrow from them without being or contravening any rule or regulation. But few people are aware that that kind of products already exist, that we can learn from them and borrow from them and be able to not necessarily imitate, but start from there to build new products. On the other side, when we train, there are two components, as you mentioned. One is about values. We do our best to educate our students and tell them that they have to do their own works. And you know, in education sector, copying is or cheating is a crime, if I can put it that way. And it is not only about educating them, but we also have tools to cross-check. So nowadays we have softwares, and University of Rwanda has invested a lot of money to acquire a software, so that whenever you have a dissertation or an article to publish, you pass it through the software, and it can indicate you whether it has been published by someone else, or whether the content, the originality of the content doesn't reach the minimum required to be considered as original. So not only we make sure that our students are well informed about the importance of doing their own work and not copy, but they can learn from others, but also we have tools to cross-check and make sure that we do not copy what has been done by others without their permission. You can cite, you know, rules in scientific publications are very clear what is acceptable and what is not acceptable.
You know, if you may allow me, pass you, but we want to find a solution. One, the issue of you know, intellectual property and patent rights and copyrights has been quite a hot topic in the recent days, especially in our country. And this goes to actually both of you. How do we fight it? How do we, using the data that we have, but also creating such a society that is very, you know, does not want to actually cross that road and go that way?
Yeah. I can answer that two ways. One is this initiative, I think it was mentioned previously at University of Rwanda, these incubation centers, innovation and incubation centers are starting. And I was recently talking with a person directing this new one. It's with partners in Sweden, and it's very interesting, and I think it's really going to have a big impact. And part of that will be educating and informing people about what are the things that they need to be aware of when they're approaching an innovation and getting it ready to put it out there, because that's where there's that potential for problems to occur with the intellectual property rights, for example. And also, you know, there's going to be a process for really helping people go through a process if the patent is needed, for example. But I think the other thing is, I really like to start from having the bar really high and assuming that people are going to, you know, behave in a right way, and not start from assuming that people are going to cheat or lie. And I handle my students that way as well. And they need to rise to that occasion. And if they don't, then, you know, as we said, we have tools and structures in place to deal with that. But I think it's really teaching our young people that, you know, this is the society we live in. We expect you to be honest and operate with integrity, and we need to model that as well. So we demand, you know, a high standard when we go into it, and then I find often people rise to the occasion. They meet that, and many people want to work in that environment. And again, where they don't, we need to have, you know, structures in place to catch that. But yeah, that's how I would answer those two approaches.
Do you have some inputs?
Yeah, I think 2 points very briefly. One, we as leaders, as scientists, we need to always remind and educate our researchers, our innovators, our students about the importance of registering their research output, their innovation output, and knowing the importance actually. Some of it is that they don't know the importance enough. Mm-hmm. You have some, you know, patent, register it immediately. If you have some intellectual property, register it immediately. That's one. 2, we have a very good enabling environment. It takes just minutes or an hour to register your research output or innovation output at the Rwanda Development Board. And actually, when we are measuring in the report of the status of science and technology innovation, one of the good indicators is doing business and registration of these research and technology output. So we have to tell them, we have an enabling environment. It takes a while to register your output. Be smart and go and register it.
Interesting. I also want to engage you in, especially in how to develop a thriving industry in research and development. I understand a number of things have been done. Financing research and innovation, but also training and all that. But you know, usually the span of how some of the innovations survive in the market becomes a problem. Some close even a year after starting. Quite a number of exciting innovations, projects, but they close as soon as they start. How do we make sure that you know, some of these startups, research-based startups and innovations actually survive the industry, whatever they meet in the industry?
Thank you. That's a very good question, and the good news is that, you know, as I said, we have a very good enabling environment. One of the indicators of good status of science and technology environment is funding instrument. So actually, we have to thank the government of Rwanda for these efforts, for supporting science, technology to be important cornerstone for all our government of Rwanda sectors. His Excellency, the President, has been a champion of science and technology. We thank him for that. And so, for instance, we have a funding instrument called National Research Innovation Fund that funds initial stages of research, from basic research, applied research, to experimental research. And these are grants. This is free money. But of course, we monitor it and we guide you towards a certain policy, how to utilize the money. That's one. We also have a funding instrument called Rwanda Innovation Fund and RDB to support innovations that have passed the time, technology development towards commercialization. They have already a good outcome in terms of innovations, but they don't have enough funds. And so they are also funded with very limited interests so that they are able to be tested and scaled up on the market. But also in the grant that we launched today, the Rwanda Innovation Challenge, which we are benchmarking from other international granting mechanisms, like Grant Challenges family, who we have been in contact. We will put funding to scale up researchers' innovation. So when you have some innovation, we support you towards finalization, and of course also you tap into other funding mechanisms by the government.
Do you access these finances as businesses? How easily do you access them, if you actually do?
Yeah, thank you. All these fundings and different initiatives, it's about information, knowing where they are located,
Exactly.
and how to access them, and the criterias. But what I will say is, we always get information from different sectors, of course, which are supporting innovations and businesses and business ideas. And what I would say is always to do awareness of these things, where they are, and what are the targets, yeah? So that even those students we are talking about, people who are involved in research and development, people who are interested in doing innovation, they will know where to address the issues, where to address their ideas, yeah? So that they can access the funding, the funds. I know they are there, but of course, collaboration still is really very key. If we are talking about institutions of higher learning, private sector, and other players, development partners, projects, all these things, they need to collaborate and maybe have a space to communicate these things on a regular basis, I would say.
Exactly. One of the issues, Dr. Eugene, allow me to get back to you, is these funds are there, the mechanisms are there, but sometimes when you get to actually hear people, we have this common analogy of in the corridors, they tend to say access becomes a problem. There are all these layers of until you actually get to access the finances. How do you make it easy for innovators to access these funds that you actually have in plenty?
Thank you. So she has made a very good point that it's about the question of awareness.
Yeah.
For those who are eligible or can potentially apply for these funds, I should say that a very good proportion of them know that these funds exist.
So they will
If
not
I can
require,
give you...
They will not require 900 pages of application.
No. We don't go into looking at the volumes of papers that you have written, but we are very objective in knowing the quality of science you have written in application or competing for these funding mechanisms. I'll give you an example. We are funding 19 grants on academia-industry collaboration already, but these who succeeded are among more than 200 applicants. We are also funding 19 grants to mitigate COVID-19 pandemic and other associated factors like community and society resistance. But again, there are so many people who applied, and these are the best. So I should say, for those who are eligible, they know, and for sure we will do our best again to do mass communication. Even now, the way we talk here, I'm sure people are going to listen to us.
So the funds are there. If you're an innovator, I want you may reassure them that actually if they come to you, they'll get the money.
Absolutely. You know, the government of Rwanda is committed to becoming a knowledge-based economy, to work hard towards the Vision 2050. And the government, believe me or not, cannot do without supporting science and technology innovations, research, because there is no country that has ever developed without tapping into the potential of science and technology. We are sure and we will continue to advocate to our leaders so that they do what actually they do at the moment.
Kevin and professors here, the money is there. Tell your innovators that money is there and it is easily to be accessed. Your money is there, it should be easily accessed. Your parting shots, I'm told we have 2 minutes to close this show. It's been nice, but if you have anything to close by, I will start with you, Professor Jambawaji.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I would like to say that so far we have to look at it in terms of the pathway from the idea to research findings and innovation. And I would say that we are doing well up to research and publications. And for the funding of innovation, there is some seed money but we need to relook at it, to revisit it, and make sure that we really manage to mobilize more funding for innovation, for research and development. It is good that we have initial funding, and University of Rwanda has got quite good inputs, financial contribution from the National Commission for Science and Technology, and are very grateful to the Commission, and we really we are happy with the working relationship with the Commission. And we also mobilizing a lot of funds from outside the country. But at University of Rwanda, so far we have not yet had our own research fund. And it is also a weakness because we heavily depend on funding from outside. And that means that most of the research activities are not informed by our internal research agenda, but most of the time it is informed by the counterpart researcher, the principal investigator outside our country, who initiated the research activity. So, so far, yes, the government of Rwanda is doing a great job and supporting research, supporting innovation. But for innovation, we have to, again, sit and look at it and try to get consistent funding for industry and for research institutions, and bring them together, share equipment, share resources, share knowledge, because also opportunities to share knowledge so that we could really know what is being produced in terms of knowledge and what we can uptake to innovations and support innovators. Lastly, I would like to say that everything could be very good. However, so far, excellent researchers do not get necessary incentives to remain in a research area as we would like to see it happening.
A challenge thrown again to you, Dr. Eugene. I had 2 minutes and you've used 3 minutes, so I'll use, let's have consensus to allow Dr. Eugene, whose council has enabled this very show, to give us in 10 seconds your parting shots. He has talked about something that I think you need to respond to in the next 20 seconds.
Very briefly, we shall continue to advocate for researchers and scientists to do more through incentives to do more innovative research.
Yeah.
Challenge them, but also ensure that they have the best output in terms of innovations to support our country growth.
Dr. Eugene Mutimura is the Executive Secretary of the National Council for Science and Technology. Professor Beth Kaplan, who is the Director of Center of Excellence for Biodiversity at the University of Rwanda. We also had Mrs. Kevin Bajaneza, who is the founder and CEO of Natcom Services Limited, a company that is actually in so much into research, technology, and innovation. I also had Professor Alexander Yambawaje, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Rwanda. I want to thank you all for your time indeed and for your contribution in making this program what it has been. Quite an interesting one, I actually think.
Thank you.
Now, I am told we don't have much of the time. Now, next from this very program, we have the World Cup qualifier, Rwanda versus Mali. So this is the very station you're going to be watching it from. So stay tuned. Until next time, I'm Ethan Tashubia. Bye for now.